"If you can compose a melody right now, I'll marry you," said the CEO with a challenging smile. What the Australian janitor did next left everyone in shock, and what seemed like an impulsive comment triggered a series of events that would forever change the fate of 3 lives. Secrets came to light, hearts were touched, and a story of love, music, and redemption was born in the corridors of a record label in Melbourne. Get ready to be moved by a story about new beginnings, silent courage, and the power of a forgotten piano. This is the story that will warm your heart. The glass lobby of Southern Echo Records glimmered under the soft glow of Melbourne's nightlights. Outside, a gentle autumn rain painted the windows with delicate streaks, transforming the cityscape into a watercolor of blurred neon and shadow. Inside, polished marble floors reflected the warm amber of brass fixtures, creating an atmosphere of hushed elegance that belied the frantic energy that filled these halls during daylight hours. It was past midnight when Eliza Morgan, CEO of Southern Echo Records, pushed through the revolving doors, her heels clicking a sharp staccato against the marble. The day had been a marathon of negotiations, conference calls, and executive decisions that left her drained. At 42, Eliza had mastered the art of appearing invincible. Impeccable in her tailored navy suit, auburn hair swept into a sleek chignon, and posture that never betrayed exhaustion. But tonight, alone in the empty lobby, she allowed her shoulders to slump ever so slightly. The building was quiet, save for the distant hum of the night cleaning crew. Eliza paused, fishing for her phone in her designer bag. The screen illuminated her face with its harsh blue light. 3 missed calls from her Uncle Graham, the label's majority shareholder, and her perpetual shadow on the board. Tomorrow's problem, she decided, silencing the device. That's when she noticed him, a solitary figure crouched beside the grand piano that sat, largely ceremonial, in the eastern corner of the lobby. In the 5 years since Eliza had orchestrated its placement there, ambiance, she'd called it in the board meeting, she'd never once seen anyone actually play it. The man wore the navy uniform of the building's maintenance staff. He wasn't playing but was meticulously polishing the brass pedals, his movements precise and reverent. Something about his careful attention arrested her usual beeline to the executive elevator. "You know," Eliza said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space, "that piano hasn't been tuned in years." The man startled, quickly rising to his feet. In the low light, Eliza could make out features that seemed vaguely familiar. Sandy hair touched with grey at the temples, a face weathered, but not old, perhaps in his mid-40s. His name badge read Daniel. "Ms. Morgan." He nodded respectfully. "I didn't expect anyone this late. Just finishing up here." There was something in his demeanour, a quiet dignity perhaps, that made Eliza curious. Most of the maintenance staff averted their eyes when she passed, intimidated by her reputation or position. This man met her gaze directly, though not disrespectfully. "Do you play?" she asked, gesturing toward the piano. A flicker of something, pain, nostalgia, crossed his face before he composed it into a polite smile. "Used to. Long time ago." Eliza moved closer to the piano, running a manicured finger across its glossy surface. The day's frustrations, the endless compromise of corporate life, the looming quarterly report, all of it, suddenly felt suffocating. On impulse, she lifted the key cover. "Play something," she said, surprising herself with the request. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Ms. Morgan. Besides, as you said, it's probably out of tune." "Humour me," Eliza insisted, stepping back from the piano. "It's been a day of numbers and lawyers. I could use something human." The janitor hesitated, glancing at the piano with an expression Eliza couldn't quite decipher. For a moment she thought he might refuse, but then he carefully set down his cleaning supplies and wiped his hands on a cloth from his pocket. "Just a few notes, then," he conceded, sliding onto the bench with a familiarity that surprised her. His hands hovered over the keys for a long moment, as if reacquainting themselves with old friends. Then gently, he pressed a single key. The note hung in the air, slightly flat but resonant. Daniel winced almost imperceptibly, then played a simple chord progression that, despite the piano's neglected state, filled the lobby with unexpected warmth. Eliza found herself holding her breath. The man's posture had transformed, no longer the unassuming janitor but someone else entirely, someone with a past that suddenly seemed written in every line of his body. After just a few measures, Daniel stopped abruptly and stood, returning to his cleaning supplies. As you suspected, quite out of tune. Eliza felt oddly disappointed. That was lovely, even so. Where did you learn to play? Melbourne Conservatory, he answered without elaboration, busying himself with reorganizing his cart. The Melbourne Conservatory, one of the most prestigious music schools in Australia. Eliza's mind raced with questions, but something in Daniel's manner suggested he wouldn't welcome them. Instead, she heard herself say something completely unexpected. If you could compose a melody right now, I'd marry you. The words hung between them. Absurd and unretracted. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks, mortified by her impulsive statement. It was the kind of nonsensical challenge one might issue after too many glasses of wine, not something a CEO says to a maintenance worker at midnight in an empty building. Daniel looked at her with genuine surprise, then something like amusement softened his features. Careful with those offers, Miss Morgan. You never know when someone might take you up on them. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Eliza couldn't name. Then her phone buzzed again, breaking the spell. Graham, again. Reality reasserted itself. Good night, Daniel, she said, suddenly formal again as she stepped toward the elevator. Good night, Miss Morgan, he replied, returning to his work. As the elevator doors closed, Eliza caught a final glimpse of him, still standing by the piano, looking at it with an expression that suggested he was seeing something else entirely, something far away in time or place. Daniel Fraser's flat in Thornbury was small, but meticulously kept. In the narrow hallway, framed photographs chronicled a life once lived on grand stages. A younger Daniel in tuxedo at the Sydney Opera House, another at Carnegie Hall, and several of him bent over a piano, face alight with the kind of passion that comes from surrendering completely to music. These days, his hands were more familiar with mop handles and cleaning solutions than with ivory keys. Tonight they trembled slightly as he set his keys on the kitchen counter and glanced at the clock. 1:30 a.m. Mrs. Patel from next door was dozing on his sofa, the television murmuring quietly. She stirred as he entered. "You're late tonight, Danny," she said, stifling a yawn. "Sorry, Annika. Got caught up with something at work." He didn't mention the piano or the striking CEO who'd issued that bizarre challenge. Those moments felt like a dream already, one best kept to himself. No worries. Tilly's been asleep since 9. Finished. Her homework, and even practiced her scales. Mrs. Patel gathered her cardigan, though she was asking about that recital again. Daniel's expression tightened. "I've told her it's not possible right now." Mrs. Patel nodded, understanding but clearly disagreeing. As she had for the past 8 years, since his wife Emily's sudden departure had left him alone with a 3-year-old daughter, Mrs. Patel kept her opinions to herself. "Sleep well, Danny. I'll see you tomorrow evening." After she left, Daniel moved quietly to Tilly's bedroom door, pushing it open just enough to see his daughter's sleeping form. At 11, Tilly was all gangly limbs and wild, dark curls, so like her mother it sometimes hurt to look at her. A sheet of music lay open on her small desk, next to a photograph of Emily that Tilly insisted on keeping there. Back in the kitchen, Daniel opened the refrigerator but found he had no appetite. Instead, he sank into the sofa, the encounter with Eliza Morgan replaying in his mind. She hadn't recognized him, of course. Why would she? Daniel Fraser, once called Australia's most promising classical pianist, had disappeared from public view over a decade ago. Those who remembered him at all probably assumed he'd moved overseas or died. The truth was both simpler and more complicated. When Emily left, unable to cope with the pressures of being married to a struggling musician with a young child, something in Daniel had broken. Music, once his refuge, became painful. Each note reminded him of failure. Failure to provide stability, to keep his family together, to live up to his potential. So he'd walked away, cancelled concerts, declined teaching positions, avoided old colleagues, took the first steady job that would pay the bills and allow him to be home when Tilly needed him. Southern Echo Records was ironic employment for a man avoiding music, but night janitorial work meant minimal interaction with the company's actual business until tonight. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, remembering the feel of those keys beneath his fingers. The piano had indeed been terribly out of tune, but for those brief moments he'd felt something he hadn't in years, the pure, simple joy of creation. And then that absurd statement from the CEO, "If you could compose a melody right now, I'd marry you. Daniel almost laughed aloud at the memory. Eliza Morgan. Probably said outrageous things like that all the time. Rich, powerful people often did, secure in the knowledge that no one would take them literally. She'd probably forgotten the encounter already. Yet Daniel couldn't shake it. Not her words specifically, but the moment itself, the way it had punctured his carefully constructed routine, leaving him with an unsettling awareness of all he'd abandoned. He found himself moving to the small closet in the hallway, reaching for the highest shelf where a leather portfolio had sat untouched for years. Inside were compositions, some published, most not, that he'd written during what now felt like someone else's life. Daniel spread the yellowing pages across the coffee table, memories flooding back with each familiar notation. His fingers twitched, muscle memory responding to music he could hear perfectly in his mind, though no sound filled the small apartment. On impulse, he reached for a blank sheet of staff paper, kept for Tilly's lessons, and a pencil. Before he could second-guess himself, his hand began to move, sketching out a simple melody line. 4 measures, nothing elaborate. Just a fragment, really. But as he wrote, something long dormant stirred within him. Daniel stared at the notes, surprised by what had emerged. Not a showpiece or a technical challenge, but something quiet and questioning, like a conversation just beginning. On the bottom of the page, without fully understanding why, he wrote, "For EM." The next evening, Daniel arrived at Southern Echo Records earlier than usual. The daytime staff were mostly gone, leaving the building in that transitional state between business hours and night quiet. He moved through his duties mechanically, saving the lobby for last. When he finally wheeled his cart to the grand piano, he paused, glancing around to ensure he was alone. Then, from his pocket, he withdrew the folded sheet of paper with those 4 measures. Daniel placed it carefully on the piano, tucked just behind the music stand where it wouldn't be immediately obvious, but would be found by anyone who sat down to play. It was a foolish gesture, he knew. Childish, even. The CEO would never see it, or if she did, would never connect it to their strange midnight encounter. Yet as Daniel turned away from the piano to begin his shift, he felt lighter somehow, as if those 4 measures had been a weight he'd carried far too long. Across the city in her South Bank penthouse, Eliza Morgan stood at her window, looking out over Melbourne's glittering skyline without really seeing it. The day had been as demanding as expected: quarterly projections to review, talent contracts to approve, and a particularly tense meeting with her Uncle Graham about the label's direction. "We need to be more aggressive with streaming rights," Graham had insisted, his aristocratic features hardened with disapproval. "Your father built this company by staying ahead of technological changes, not by clinging to romantic notions about artist development." The implicit criticism stung, as it always did. Eliza's father had founded Southern Echo 30 years ago with a commitment to nurturing Australian talent, not just chasing profits. Since his death 5 years earlier, she'd fought to maintain that vision while adapting to industry changes. Graham, her father's younger brother and largest shareholder after Eliza herself, never missed an opportunity to suggest she was failing at both. Now, as the evening stretched before her, another charity gala she should attend, another networking opportunity she should maximize. Eliza found herself thinking instead about the janitor with the pianist's hands, Daniel, and the strange comfort she'd found in those few notes he'd played. Without fully deciding to do so, Eliza changed from her evening gown into jeans and a cashmere sweater. 15 minutes later, she was walking through the lobby of Southern Echo Records again, nodding to the night security guard who did a double take at her casual attire. "Just forgot something in my office," she explained, moving toward the elevator. But once the guard returned to his monitors, Eliza veered toward the grand piano instead. She wasn't sure what she was doing here, what she expected to find, yet something pulled her toward those 88 keys and the memory of hands that had once known them well. The lobby was silent except for the distant hum of the building's systems. Eliza slid onto the piano bench, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. She hadn't played properly in years, though she'd had lessons through university. Music had always been her father's domain. She had been drawn to the business side, the structures that supported creation rather than creation itself. Almost absently, she lifted the music stand, not expecting to find anything. But there it was. A single sheet of paper with 4 measures of music written in a neat, practiced hand. At the bottom, 2 initials that matched her own, for EM. Eliza stared at the notation, her heart beating suddenly faster. It couldn't be. And yet, her fingers found the keys, carefully picking out the melody. Despite the piano's neglected tuning, the phrase bloomed in the empty lobby, wistful and questioning, with an underlying warmth that seemed to reach directly into her chest. 4 measures, a beginning without a middle or end, a question without an answer. If you could compose a melody right now, I'd marry you. Her own impulsive words returned to her, and for the first time since she'd uttered them, Eliza smiled. For the next week, Eliza found herself drawn to the lobby piano at odd hours, sometimes late at night after everyone had gone, sometimes early in the morning before the day staff arrived. Each time she would sit and play those same 4 measures, letting the melody's question hang in the air unanswered. She'd had the piano tuned, a decision that raised eyebrows among the administrative staff, but was executed without question. For special guests, she'd explained vaguely, though none were scheduled. On Friday evening, after a particularly grueling board meeting where Graham had once again criticized her sentimental approach to artist development, Eliza lingered in her office until the building emptied. Then, drawn by what was becoming a familiar compulsion, she made her way to the lobby. She wasn't expecting to find Daniel already there, standing frozen beside the piano, cloth in hand, clearly surprised by her appearance. "Ms. Morgan," he said, straightening, "I was just— Please, don't stop on my account." Eliza interrupted, suddenly self-conscious. She gestured to the piano. "I had it tuned." "I noticed," Daniel replied, a hint of appreciation in his voice. "It sounds much better." An awkward silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Eliza had spent the week researching Daniel Fraser, the former concert pianist whose promising career had mysteriously ended over a decade ago. The man who now stood before her, maintaining flaws instead of maintaining his place among Australia's musical elite. "Your melody," she finally said. "It's beautiful." Daniel's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "You found it." "I did." Eliza moved closer to the piano. "Though it feels unfinished?" The corner of Daniel's mouth lifted slightly. "That's because it is." Another silence, but this one less strained. Eliza gestured to the bench. "Would you play it, the way it's meant to sound?" Daniel hesitated, then slowly set down his cleaning supplies and moved to the piano. As he sat, Eliza noticed the same transformation she'd witnessed the week before, his posture straightening, his hands finding the keys with the ease of old friendship. The melody, properly played on the now-tuned piano, was even more affecting. Simple yet profound, like a question asked with complete sincerity. Daniel played it twice through, then let his hands rest on the keys. "Why did you stop?" Eliza asked quietly, not referring to the melody. Daniel didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Life happened. Sometimes we have to make choices." "Your daughter," Eliza said, revealing what she'd learned. Daniel looked up, surprised. "You've been checking up on me." "Professional curiosity," Eliza replied, though they both knew it was more than that. Daniel's expression softened. "Tilly, she's 11 now, smart, stubborn, and starting to ask questions I don't always have answers for. Like why her father cleans floors instead of playing concerts. Like why her mother left and never came back," Daniel corrected gently. "The piano, that was just collateral damage." The raw honesty in his voice caught Eliza off guard. In her world of strategic business negotiations and careful corporate speak, such directness was rare. She found herself responding in kind. "My father founded this company believing that music could change lives, not just listeners' lives, but the lives of the people who create it." She gestured around the lobby. "Somewhere along the way, I think I forgot that." Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. "It's easy to lose sight of why we started something when we're busy keeping it going." "Yes," Eliza agreed. Struck by the simple wisdom of his observation, she nodded toward the piano. "Will you finish it? The melody?" Daniel's fingers brushed the keys without pressing them. "I don't know if I can. It's been a long time." "Try," Eliza said, echoing his challenge from a week ago. "You never know when someone— I might take you up on it." A smile ghosted across Daniel's face as he recognized his own words. For a moment, it seemed he might refuse. Then he began to play, not just the original 4 measures, but continuing, the melody unfolding like a conversation finding its rhythm, questioning and answering itself in turns. Eliza watched his hands move across the keys, creating something from nothing, and felt an unexpected surge of emotion. This was what her father had understood, what she had nearly forgotten in the rush of quarterly reports and market shares, the simple, profound magic of creation. When Daniel finished, the final notes lingering in the air between them, neither spoke immediately. The moment felt fragile, as if a single wrong word might shatter it. Finally, Eliza said, "Thank you." Daniel nodded, rising from the bench. "I should get back to work." "Of course." Eliza stepped back, resuming her role as CEO. "Good night, Mr. Fraser." "Good night, Ms. Morgan." As she walked toward the elevator, Eliza stopped and turned. "Daniel, would you consider teaching again? Not professionally necessarily, but there's a community center in Fitzroy that runs a music program for children. They're always looking for volunteers." Daniel's expression was unreadable. "I'll think about it," he said finally. It wasn't until Eliza was in her car, driving home through Melbourne's Friday night traffic, that she realized she'd suggested the very center where she herself volunteered monthly, reviewing the program's finances. The coincidence, or perhaps not coincidence at all, made her smile. Across the city, in his small flat, Daniel tucked Tilly into bed. She'd been waiting up for him despite Mrs. Patel's best efforts. "Dad," she said, her dark eyes serious in the glow of her bedside lamp, "I want to play in the school concert." Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest. "Tilly, we've talked about this." "But why not?" she persisted, her chin tilting up in a gesture so like her mother's that it took his breath away. "Ms. Willis says I'm good enough and you could help me practice." "It's not about being good enough," Daniel said carefully. "It's about—" He trailed off, realizing he wasn't sure anymore what it was about. Fear? Pride? The memory of applause that had once sustained him and then become a burden too heavy to bear? Tilly was watching him with that penetrating gaze that made her seem far older than 11. "Is it because of Mum?" The question hung between them, rarely voiced so directly. Daniel sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "No, sweetheart. Your mum would want you to play, if that's what you love." "Then it's because of you," Tilly said, not accusingly, but with the simple clarity of a child stating facts. "Because you don't play anymore." Daniel thought of the piano in the Southern Echo lobby, of the melody that had come to him after years of silence, of Eliza Morgan's unexpected challenge. "Maybe it's time we both started playing again," he said softly. Tilly's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really." Daniel smoothed her wild curls. "Now go to sleep. We'll talk more tomorrow." As Tilly settled under her covers, her expression already dreamy with possibilities, Daniel felt something shift inside him. A door long locked, creaking open just a fraction, letting in a sliver of light from a world he'd abandoned. The Fitzroy Community Arts Center buzzed with Saturday morning energy. In various rooms, children learned painting, dance, drama, and music, the latter spilling from a large room at the back where a dozen or so kids aged 7 to 15 clustered around upright pianos and small electronic keyboards. Eliza Morgan, dressed down in jeans and a simple blouse, stood at the entrance to the music room, clipboard in hand. Normally, her monthly visits involved reviewing budgets in the administrative office, but today she'd made a point of arriving during class time. "Ms. Morgan," the program director, Sophia Chen, approached with a smile. "This is a surprise. We usually don't see you until the end of the month." "I thought I'd see the program in action for once," Eliza explained, trying to sound casual. "How are the new keyboards working out?" "Wonderfully," Sophia beamed. "The children love them. Though we're still short on instructors." "Oh." Her exclamation caused Eliza to turn. There, in the doorway, stood Daniel, with a young girl beside him. His daughter, Eliza presumed. Tilly was all long limbs and wild curls, visibly nervous but holding her ground. "Mr. Fraser," Sophia said, clearly surprised. "I didn't expect you until next week." Daniel looked equally surprised to see Eliza. "I thought we'd come observe first before committing," he explained to Sophia, though his eyes remained on Eliza. "Of course," Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "And this must be Tilly. Welcome. Would you like to join the beginners group today? They're just starting on a new piece." Tilly looked up at her father, who gave her an encouraging nod. With a deep breath, she followed Sophia toward a cluster of children around one of the keyboards. Left alone, Daniel and Eliza regarded each other awkwardly. "So," Daniel said finally, "the community center in Fitzroy. I volunteer with their financial planning, Eliza admitted. I should have mentioned that. Would it have changed your recommendation? Eliza considered this. No, they really do need teachers, and the children need someone who remembers what it's like to love music before it becomes complicated, Daniel suggested. Exactly, Eliza smiled, relieved he understood. They stood in companionable silence, watching Tilly tentatively join the other children. For a girl who had grown up with a former concert pianist as a father, she seemed surprisingly uncertain at the keyboard. She hasn't had much formal instruction, Daniel said, as if reading Eliza's thoughts. I taught her basics, but teaching your own child is its own special challenge, Eliza finished. Daniel nodded. How did you know to suggest this place? Your melody, Eliza said simply. It needed somewhere to go. The honest answer seemed to catch Daniel off guard. Before he could respond, Sophia returned, practically bouncing with excitement. Mr. Fraser, would you consider demonstrating for the advanced group? They're working on a particularly difficult passage from Debussy, and I think hearing it properly played would help enormously. Daniel hesitated, glancing at Tilly, who was now cautiously picking out notes with another girl. She'll be fine, Eliza assured him. Go, play. Something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or encouragement. Daniel nodded and followed Sophia to the grand piano at the far end of the room where a group of teenagers watched with varying degrees of interest. Eliza drifted closer, ostensibly checking items on her clipboard, but actually watching as Daniel sat at the piano. Once again, she witnessed that remarkable transformation, the janitor becoming the maestro, his entire being realigning with a truth his body remembered, even if his mind had tried to forget. He played the Debussy passage Clair de Lune, Eliza recognized with effortless grace, his fingers drawing emotion from the keys that seemed to suspend time in the crowded, noisy room. One by one, the children fell silent, even the youngest ones pausing their own practice to listen. When Daniel finished, there was a moment of perfect stillness before the teenagers burst into questions and exclamations. Even Sophia looked stunned, though she had clearly known who Daniel was when she'd invited him. Across the room, Tilly watched her father with wide eyes. Not surprised by his skill, Eliza thought, but by the public display of it. How long had it been since the girl had seen her father play for anyone but her? The rest of the morning passed in a blur of introductions and arrangements. By the time the session ended, Daniel had agreed to return weekly to help with the advanced students, and Tilly had been warmly welcomed into the intermediate group, her initial nervousness replaced by cautious enthusiasm. As families began to disperse, Daniel and Tilly approached Eliza, who was finishing her conversation with Sophia. Thank you, Daniel said simply, for the push. I didn't push, Eliza protested. I merely suggested. Dad never listens to suggestions, Tilly piped up, earning a surprised laugh from both adults. Is that so? Eliza asked, addressing the girl directly for the first time. Well, I'm glad he made an exception. Tilly regarded Eliza with undisguised curiosity. Are you really the boss of the big music company? Tilly, Daniel admonished gently, but Eliza waved it away. She confirmed. Southern Echo Records. And you know my dad from work, Tilly continued, clearly piecing together a puzzle. That's right. But you're not just his boss, Tilly pressed, her gaze uncomfortably perceptive, because bosses don't usually come to watch their cleaners play piano on Saturday mornings. Daniel looked mortified, but Eliza found herself charmed by the girl's directness. You're right, she agreed. I think we might be becoming friends, if that's all right with you. Tilly considered this seriously, then nodded. I think that would be okay. Dad doesn't have many friends. Tilly, Daniel groaned. But there was more embarrassment than reproach in his tone. Well, you don't, his daughter insisted. Just Mrs. Patel and Mr. Gunderson from the bookshop, and they're both really old. Eliza bit back a smile. In that case, I'm honored to join such an exclusive group. She glanced at her watch. I should be going. I have a meeting across town. On a Saturday? Daniel asked. The music business doesn't exactly keep regular hours, Eliza shrugged. But this was worth the detour. As she turned to leave, Tilly called after her. Are you coming next? Saturday too. Eliza looked at Daniel, who seemed caught between embarrassment and hope. I'm not sure, she answered honestly. My schedule can be unpredictable. But you'll try, Tilly persisted. I'll try, Eliza promised, surprised to find she meant it. As she drove away from the community center, Eliza felt lighter than she had in months. The morning had been a respite from balance sheets and market projections, a reminder of why Southern Echo mattered beyond its quarterly earnings. And Daniel Fraser, he was a revelation. The way music transformed him, the quiet dignity with which he'd rebuilt his life around his daughter, the talent he'd set aside but not lost, all of it intrigued her in ways she hadn't expected. Her phone buzzed with a text from Graham. "Where are you?" "Kingston." "And his team have been waiting 20 minutes. Reality reasserted itself. Eliza sighed, turned her car toward the financial district, and prepared to return to being the CEO her uncle expected. Decisive, strategic, unsentimental. But as Melbourne's Saturday traffic flowed around her, those 4 measures of Daniel's melody played in her mind, a quiet counterpoint to the rhythm of the city. Melbourne spring unfurled gradually over the following weeks, painting the city's gardens with splashes of color and softening the urban edges with golden light. At Southern Echo Records, Eliza found herself caught in the annual cycle of contract negotiations and talent scouting that always intensified before summer. Yet even in the midst of 18-hour days, she made time for Saturday mornings at the Fitzroy Community Arts Centre. She told herself it was about reconnecting with Southern Echo's mission, about honoring her father's vision of nurturing Australian talent. But if she were honest, and Eliza prided herself on honesty, at least with herself, the pull had more to do with Daniel Fraser and the melody that continued to evolve between them. Each Saturday, Daniel would arrive with Tilly, teach his advanced students and sometimes play himself, brief demonstrations that never failed to captivate everyone within hearing distance. Eliza would review budgets, chat with Sophia about program needs, and inevitably find herself drawn to whatever room contained Daniel's music. They never explicitly arranged to meet, yet somehow always found a moment to exchange a few words about the program, about music, occasionally about their lives beyond the community centre. Small revelations offered carefully, building a picture pixel by pixel. Today, Eliza arrived later than usual, having been delayed by an unexpected call from a major artist threatening to leave the label. She slipped into the main music room quietly, not wanting to disturb the class in progress. Daniel stood at the grand piano surrounded by his advanced students. He was explaining something about interpretation, his hands moving expressively as he spoke. "Music isn't just about hitting the right notes," he was saying. "It's about understanding what lies between them, the intention, the emotion, the question being asked." One of the teenagers, a serious boy with glasses, raised his hand. "But how do you know what question the composer is asking?" Daniel smiled. "That's the beautiful part. You don't, not exactly. You bring your own questions to the piece. Your interpretation becomes a conversation across time with the composer." Eliza leaned against the doorframe, struck by the passion in Daniel's voice. This was a different man from the quiet janitor who polished floors with careful precision. Here, he was in his element, not performing but sharing, guiding, illuminating. The class ended, and as the students dispersed, Daniel noticed Eliza. Something in his expression warmed, a subtle shift that she'd begun to recognize and, if she were honest, anticipate. "You're late today," he observed as she approached. "Crisis at work. An artist making demands." Eliza shrugged. "The usual. Must be." Difficult, balancing all those creative temperaments. Says the man teaching teenagers to express their deepest emotions through Debussy, Eliza retorted with a smile. Daniel laughed, a sound she'd heard more frequently in recent weeks. Fair point. Though they're surprisingly resilient, these kids, less fragile than some professional musicians I've known. Less ego, more heart, Eliza agreed. She glanced around. "Where's Tilly today?" "At a friend's birthday party. First one she's been invited to since we moved to the neighborhood." Daniel's expression held a mixture of pride and concern that Eliza had come to recognize as the hallmark of single parenthood. Joy at every small victory, worry about every potential setback. "That's wonderful," Eliza said warmly. "She's opening up more. Every week." "Like her old man," Daniel replied with a self-deprecating smile. Sophia appeared then, clipboard in hand. "Eliza, do you have a moment to look at the summer program budget? There are a few items I'd like your input on." "Of course." Eliza turned to Daniel. "Will you be here when I'm done?" Something flickered in his eyes. Hesitation, perhaps, or possibility. "I could be. An hour." Later, having sorted through Sophia's budget concerns and promised to approach Southern Echo's charitable foundation about additional funding, Eliza found Daniel in the now empty main room. He sat at the piano, not playing, but simply resting his hands on the silent keys. "Penny for your thoughts," Eliza said, sliding onto the bench beside him. Daniel's mouth quirked. "Not sure they're worth that much. Try me." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I was thinking about what I told the students today, about music being a conversation across time." His fingers pressed a single key, softly. "For a decade, I've been refusing to participate in that conversation, shutting it out, and now you're speaking again," Eliza finished when he trailed off. Daniel nodded. "It's like learning a language you once knew fluently. Familiar but rusty. Exciting but terrifying." "Why terrifying?" His hands spread across the keys without pressing them. "Because I remember how much it hurt to lose it." The raw honesty in his voice caught Eliza off guard. In her world of strategic negotiations and careful corporate positioning, such directness was rare and precious. "Would you play something for me?" she asked. "Not a demonstration or a lesson, just something you love." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. His hands settled into position, and he began to play. Not a classical piece this time, but something more contemporary, a film score Eliza recognized but couldn't immediately name. The melody was wistful yet hopeful, simple on the surface but with complex emotions flowing beneath. As the final notes faded, Eliza realized she'd been holding her breath. That was beautiful. "Joe Hisaishi," Daniel explained, "from Howl's Moving Castle. Tilly loves Studio Ghibli films. We watch them together on Sunday evenings." The image, Daniel and Tilly curled on their sofa, sharing these gentle magical stories, touched Eliza unexpectedly. Her own Sundays were typically spent preparing for the week ahead, reviewing reports, answering emails. When had she last taken an evening simply to enjoy something beautiful? "Have you had lunch?" she heard herself ask. Daniel looked surprised. "No. I usually grab something on the way home. There's a cafe 2 blocks from here that makes excellent sandwiches. Would you, if you don't have plans?" "I'd like that," Daniel said, saving her from her uncharacteristic stammering. The cafe was busy with Saturday lunch crowds, but they found a small table in the back garden, sheltered by a large umbrella. Conversation flowed more easily than Eliza had expected, moving from music to books to favorite spots in Melbourne. Daniel spoke about Tilly, her struggles and triumphs at school, her budding interest in both music and art, her questions about her absent mother that grew more complex as she grew older. "She has Emily's old photographs on her desk," Daniel shared. "Asks about her sometimes. I try to be honest without burdening her with adult complexities." "That must be difficult," Eliza said, "finding that balance." "The hardest part of parenting," Daniel agreed. "What about you? Do you have family besides your uncle?" Eliza shook her head. "Just Graham, and we're not exactly close. My mother died when I was in university. My father 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Daniel said simply. "It was expected. Pancreatic cancer, but still." Eliza trailed off, surprised to find the grief still so accessible. He built Southern Echo from nothing, had this vision of a label that would develop artists, not just exploit them. "I'm trying to maintain that, but the industry has changed so much." "And your uncle doesn't share the vision?" "Graham sees numbers, not notes." Eliza smiled ruefully. "He thinks I'm sentimental and impractical." "The world needs both kinds of people," Daniel observed. "The practical ones keep the lights on. The sentimental ones remind us why we need light in the first place." The simple wisdom of his observation struck Eliza deeply. "That's it exactly," she said softly. "I never thought of it that way." Their lunch stretched to coffee, and then to a stroll through the nearby gardens. The afternoon light was softening toward evening when they finally reached the community center's parking lot. This was, Daniel searched for the right word, unexpected. Good unexpected. "I hope," Eliza said, feeling suddenly shy. "Very good," he confirmed, his eyes warm, "though I should probably clarify something." "Oh? I'm not actually the janitor anymore. I was promoted to facilities manager last month. Small raise, slightly better hours." Eliza laughed. "Congratulations, though I hope this doesn't mean you'll stop polishing the piano pedals with such dedication." "Some habits die hard," Daniel replied with a smile. As they stood beside her car, An unspoken question hung between them. Eliza, accustomed to certainty in her professional life, found herself hesitant in this personal territory. "Tilly asked if you might join us for dinner sometime," Daniel said finally. "No pressure, of course. She's just curious about you." "I'd like that," Eliza replied, surprised by how much she meant it. "My schedule is chaotic next week, but perhaps the week after." "We'll be here," Daniel said simply. As Eliza drove home through Melbourne's golden afternoon light, she found herself humming the melody Daniel had played for her, the film score wistful and hopeful. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the weight of Southern Echo's challenges felt manageable, balanced by something new and fragile but undeniably real. The boardroom of Southern Echo Records gleamed with corporate polish, glass, chrome, and rich wood polished to a high sheen. Around the oval table sat the 7 members of the executive team, attention focused on the large screen where quarterly projections scrolled in crisp graphics. Eliza stood at the head of the table, presenting the label's performance with the confidence that had become her trademark. Despite industry headwinds, our emerging artist division has shown remarkable growth, with streaming numbers up 23% year over year. Graham Doyle, seated directly to her right, cleared his throat. At 63, he retained the aristocratic bearing and penetrating stare that had intimidated Eliza throughout her childhood. "And yet overall revenue is down 5%, he observed, his cultured accent making the criticism sound almost polite. "As anticipated in our annual forecast," Eliza countered smoothly, "we're investing in long-term artist development, which will yield sustainable returns rather than quick hits." "A luxury strategy in a rapidly changing market," Graham replied, the familiar argument unfolding as it had in countless meetings before. The CFO intervened with detailed breakdowns, and the discussion continued along predictable lines. Eliza maintained her composed exterior, though internally she felt the familiar frustration mounting. Graham's vision for Southern Echo, more commercial, more aggressive, more focused on immediate returns, represented everything her father had resisted throughout his leadership. 2 hours later, as the meeting finally concluded, Graham lingered behind as the others filed out. "Join me for lunch," he suggested, though his tone made it more command than invitation. The upscale restaurant overlooking the Yarra River was one of Graham's favorites, exclusive enough to ensure privacy, expensive enough to reinforce status. As they were seated, at his regular table, Eliza braced herself for the conversation to come. "You've been distracted lately," Graham began after they'd ordered, "spending Saturday mornings at that community centre instead of networking at the club." Of course he knew. Graham made it his business to know everything about Southern Echo and its leadership, especially his niece. "The Fitzroy Arts Centre is a valuable community partner," Eliza replied evenly. "Their music program aligns perfectly with our mission of developing Australian talent. And the fact that Daniel Fraser is teaching there has nothing to do with your sudden interest?" Eliza maintained her neutral expression with effort. "Daniel Fraser is an accomplished pianist who stepped away from performance years ago. His involvement adds credibility to the program. He's also a maintenance worker at our building," Graham pointed out, his tone suggesting this was somehow scandalous. "There are rumors, Eliza. There are always rumors." She took a sip of water. "Most of them baseless." "Not entirely baseless in this case, I think." Graham studied her with the penetrating gaze that had intimidated board members and artists alike for decades. "I've seen the security logs, your late-night visits to the lobby, the piano suddenly being tuned, your casual attire on Saturdays." "Are you having me followed, Graham?" Eliza asked, her voice deceptively calm. "Don't be dramatic." He waved the accusation away. "I'm concerned about the company, about your focus, about appearances." "Appearances?" Eliza repeated. "You mean you're worried what people might think if the CEO of Southern Echo befriends a facilities manager?" Graham sighed, softening his approach. "Your father built this company on relationships, Eliza. The right relationships. With artists, yes, but also with investors, with industry leaders, with people who can open doors. Daniel Fraser is a distraction at best. At worst, he could damage your credibility." "My credibility comes from our performance, not my personal associations. In a perfect world, perhaps, but we live in this one." Graham leaned forward. "I knew Daniel, you know, before. Brilliant pianist, certainly, but also unreliable, unpredictable. He walked away from commitments, left promoters and venues in difficult positions. There's a reason his career ended." Eliza felt a flare of protectiveness. He made choices for his family, for his daughter. Ah, yes, the daughter. Graham's expression grew calculating. Another complication, wouldn't you say? Taking on someone else's child? I'm not taking on anyone, Eliza snapped, her composure finally cracking. I'm having conversations with an intelligent, talented man who happens to work in our building, and occasionally I spend time at a community arts program that benefits children who might not otherwise have access to music education. If that interferes with your vision of appropriate CEO behavior, I apologize. Graham studied her for a long moment. You're falling for him, he said finally. Not a question, but an observation. Eliza didn't answer immediately. Was she? The Saturday lunches that had become routine, the text messages exchanging thoughts about music or books, the dinner at Daniel's flat, where Tilly had proudly shown her art projects and played a simple piece on their small keyboard, all of it had woven itself into the fabric of her life with surprising ease. My personal life is my own, Graham, she said finally, not when it affects Southern Echo. Graham's voice hardened. Your father entrusted me with protecting his legacy, and yours. Don't make me intervene more directly. The threat hung between them as their meals arrived. Eliza maintained her composure through the rest of lunch, discussing safer topics, an upcoming industry conference, a promising new singer-songwriter, plans for the label's 30th anniversary celebration. But Graham's words echoed in her mind as she returned to her office. How much of her interest in Daniel was rebellion against her uncle's controlling influence? How much was genuine connection? And did those questions even matter if pursuing the relationship might threaten everything she'd worked to build? That evening, Eliza cancelled her plans to meet Daniel for coffee after his shift. The text felt cold and formal as she sent it. Something's come up at work, need to reschedule, sorry for late notice. But she needed space to think, to weigh choices that suddenly seemed consequential in ways she hadn't anticipated. Instead of going home, she remained in her office late into the night, reviewing contracts and listening to demos from new artists. Around midnight, she found herself drawn to the elevator, down to the lobby, where it had all begun. The grand piano stood silent in the corner, polished and perfectly tuned. Eliza sat at the bench, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. The melody Daniel had begun, their melody as she'd come to think of it, played in her mind, evolving and expanding as it had over the weeks they'd known each other. Working late? Daniel's voice startled her. He stood by his cleaning cart, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Just thinking, Eliza replied, withdrawing her hands from the keys. I didn't expect to see you here. Covering for a colleague, Daniel explained. His daughter has a fever. The reference to parental responsibility hung between them. The very thing that Graham had suggested was a complication, a barrier. I'm sorry about tonight, Eliza said. The cancellation. Daniel shrugged lightly. It happens. Everything all right? No, Eliza thought. Nothing is all right. I'm being warned away from you by my uncle, who seems to think you're a threat to everything I've built. And the worst part is I'm not entirely sure he's wrong. Just work pressures, she said instead. End of quarter chaos. Daniel nodded, clearly sensing there was more but not pressing. I should finish up here. Of course. Eliza stood, smoothing her skirt. Good night, Daniel. As she walked toward the elevator, Daniel called after her. Eliza? She turned. Tilly's school concert is Friday evening. She's playing a piece we've been practicing. Nothing fancy, just a simple arrangement of Blackbird. But she'd like you to come, if you can. The invitation, so ordinary, so domestic, caught Eliza off guard. This was exactly the kind of entanglement Graham had warned against. Yet the thought of Tilly at her keyboard, nervous but determined, with Daniel watching proudly from the audience, created an ache of longing that surprised her with its intensity. I'd love to, she heard herself say. Daniel's smile, relieved, genuine, remained with her as the elevator carried her back to the executive floor, where spreadsheets and contracts awaited. But for the first time in her career, Eliza found herself questioning whether the path she'd followed so diligently was the only one worth walking. Northcote Primary School's multi-purpose hall buzzed with the particular energy that accompanies children's performances, a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and the barely contained chaos of young performers waiting their turn. Parents clutched programs and cameras, teachers herded students into approximate order, and folding chairs creaked under the weight of expectant families. Eliza slipped in just as the lights dimmed, scanning the crowded hall for Daniel. She'd come directly from a contract signing across town, still in her business attire, a sleek charcoal suit that made her conspicuous among the casually dressed parents. A text message guided her to a seat that Daniel had saved in the middle section, 3 rows from the front. "You made it," he whispered, as she slid into the empty chair beside him. "Barely," she admitted. "Traffic was brutal." Daniel's smile conveyed both gratitude and understanding. "Tilly spotted you coming in. She's over there with her class." Eliza followed his gesture to see a cluster of children in identical white shirts and dark pants. Tilly stood slightly apart, her wild curls barely contained by a headband, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. When she caught Eliza looking, the girl's face brightened, and she offered a small, nervous wave. Eliza waved back, suddenly, conscious of how meaningful her presence here was, not just to Tilly but to Daniel as well. This wasn't a business obligation or a networking opportunity. This was personal, intimate even, the kind of event that marked the difference between acquaintances and something more. The principal welcomed everyone with the standard pleasantries, and the concert began. Various classes performed songs, poetry recitations, and simple dance routines with varying degrees of coordination. Throughout it all, Daniel sat beside Eliza, their shoulders occasionally brushing, his attention wholly focused on the stage, even when Tilly wasn't performing. Finally, the music teacher announced the solo performers. "Our next pianist is Matilda Fraser playing Blackbird." Tilly approached the upright piano with determined steps, her small face serious as she adjusted the bench. She glanced into the audience, finding her father and Eliza, and something in her expression steadied. The opening notes were hesitant but clear, the familiar Beatles melody simplified but recognizable. As Tilly continued, her confidence grew, her small hands moving with increasing assurance across the keys. It wasn't a flawless performance. There were missed notes and uneven tempos, but it carried genuine feeling, a musicality that transcended technical precision. Eliza found herself holding her breath, moved not just by Tilly's playing, but by the intensity of Daniel's focus beside her. His hands rested on his knees, but his fingers moved slightly in unconscious accompaniment to his daughter's music. In that moment, Eliza saw something beautiful and fragile, a legacy of music passing from father to daughter, wounded but healing, broken but mending. When Tilly finished, the applause was warm and genuine. She stood, gave a quick bow as instructed, and hurried back to her place with the other students, her face flushed with accomplishment. "She was wonderful," Eliza whispered to Daniel. His smile was soft with pride. "She was, wasn't she?" After the final performance and closing remarks, they waited in the crowded foyer as students rejoined their families. Tilly burst through the double doors and ran straight to her father, who scooped her up in a hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "You were brilliant, Button," he said into her curls. "I missed the F sharp in the second verse," Tilly replied, pulling back to look at him seriously. "Nobody noticed but you," Daniel assured her, setting her down. "And even if they did, it doesn't matter. You played with heart, and that's what counts." Tilly turned to Eliza then, suddenly shy. "Did you like it?" "I loved it," Eliza said sincerely. "It made me feel like I was flying." The girl's face lit up. "That's what Dad says the song is supposed to feel like. He says music can make you feel things even without words." "Your dad is very wise," Eliza agreed, catching Daniel's eye over Tilly's head. "We're getting ice cream to celebrate," Tilly announced. "Are you coming?" The question hung in the air, innocent yet laden with implication. Eliza glanced at Daniel, who gave a small nod, an invitation, not a pressure. "I'd love to," she said. The small ice cream parlor a few blocks from the school was crowded with other families from the concert, but they found a table in the back corner. Tilly, energized by her performance and the promise of dessert, chatted about her classmates' performances, her teacher's last-minute advice, and the boy who had forgotten his lines during the poetry recitation. Daniel listened with the patient attention of a parent accustomed to navigating the rapid currents of a child's enthusiasm, occasionally catching Eliza's eye with a smile that included her in this small domestic moment. As Tilly focused on creating the perfect final bite, a precise ratio of chocolate and vanilla, Daniel leaned toward Eliza. "Thank you for coming. It meant a lot to her." "And to you?" Eliza asked softly. Daniel's eyes held hers. "More than I expected," he admitted. The simple honesty of his response touched something in Eliza, a recognition of the risk he was taking, not just with his own heart, but with Tilly's as well. This wasn't casual for either of them. Later, after they'd walked Tilly home and settled her with Mrs. Patel for the night, Daniel and Eliza strolled through the quiet streets of Northcote. The evening had cooled, and Eliza had wrapped her suit jacket more tightly around herself. "Cold?" Daniel asked. "A bit. I didn't dress for an evening walk." Without hesitation, Daniel removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was so naturally chivalrous, so uncalculated, that Eliza felt a rush of warmth that had nothing to do with the added layer. "Better?" he asked. "Much." They walked in. Companionable silence for a while, their steps falling into a shared rhythm. The neighborhood around them was a mix of old Victorian homes and newer apartments, trees arching over the sidewalks, cafes and small shops closed for the night, but glowing softly with security lights. "Graham knows about us," Eliza said finally, breaking the silence. "He's concerned." Daniel didn't pretend to. "Misunderstand. About the facilities manager and the CEO. About appearances, status, the usual nonsense." Eliza sighed. "He knew you, apparently. From before." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I'm not surprised. Southern Echo was already established when I was performing. We probably crossed paths at industry events. He said you were brilliant but unreliable, that you walked away from commitments." The words hung between them, more question than accusation. Daniel didn't respond immediately, and Eliza wondered if she'd overstepped. "He's not entirely wrong," Daniel said finally. "When Emily left, I was in the middle of a concert tour. I cancelled the remaining dates, 4 major performances, including one at the Opera House. Left a lot of people scrambling." He glanced at her. "Not my finest moment, professionally speaking. You had just become a single father to a 3-year-old. Yes, but there were options I didn't explore. Postponements rather than cancellations, for instance." Daniel shrugged. "The truth is I was angry. At Emily, at the world, at the music that had taken so much of my attention, that I hadn't seen how unhappy she was. Walking away from all of it felt like the only way to breathe." The raw honesty in his voice touched Eliza deeply. How different from the careful corporate speak she navigated daily, where vulnerabilities were concealed and failings reframed as strategic pivots. "And now," she asked quietly, "are you still angry?" Daniel considered this. "Not angry. Wiser, maybe. More aware of what matters." He looked at her directly. "Which is why I understand if your uncle's concerns give you pause. Southern Echo is your life's work. I wouldn't want to complicate that." "My life's work," Eliza repeated thoughtfully. "I've always defined it that way, but lately I've been wondering if there might be room for more." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "If I might be more than just the CEO of Southern Echo Records." Something shifted in Daniel's expression, hope, perhaps, or recognition. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she chose, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, intimate in a way that made Eliza's breath catch. "I think you've always been more," he said softly. "Perhaps you're just remembering it now." In the quiet street, with the distant hum of Melbourne, traffic as a backdrop, Eliza made a decision that had nothing to do with quarterly projections or strategic planning. She leaned forward and kissed Daniel Fraser, not impulsively, not without thought, but with perfect clarity about what she was choosing and why. His response was gentle at first, then deepening with a certainty that matched her own. When they finally drew apart, Eliza felt oddly settled, as if some restless part of her had finally found its home. "I should get you back to your car," Daniel said, his voice rougher than usual. "In a minute," Eliza replied, staying close to him. "I'm not cold anymore." The video appeared on social media on a Tuesday morning, shaky footage captured by someone's phone through the glass walls of Southern Echo's lobby. Daniel at the piano, Eliza beside him, their heads bent together over the keys as they played a duet. Nothing inappropriate, nothing scandalous by normal standards. Just 2 people making music together, their expressions animated by shared joy. But in the rarefied world of corporate Melbourne, it was enough. By noon, Eliza's assistant had fielded calls from 3 industry publications seeking comment. By 3 o'clock, Graham had summoned the executive team to an emergency meeting. By 5, The story had been picked up by entertainment blogs speculating about the relationship between Southern Echo's CEO and an employee, reportedly once famous in classical music circles. Eliza sat in her office, blinds drawn against the curious glances from staff members passing in the hallway. On her desk, her phone buzzed. Continuously with messages and notifications, she had silenced all but essential contacts, so when Daniel's text came through, it caught her attention immediately. "Just heard. Are you okay?" The simple concern in those 4 words brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Was she okay? Professionally, this was hardly a crisis, a minor distraction that would fade as soon as the next industry gossip emerged. Personally, however, something fundamental had shifted. The private world she and Daniel had been building, tentative, precious, separate from her corporate identity, was now public property, subject to speculation and judgment. "Managing," she texted back. "Meeting with board at 6, don't worry." His response came quickly. "I do worry about you. This isn't fair." Eliza smiled despite the situation. In the 3 months since Tilly's concert, she'd discovered this protective streak in Daniel. Not controlling or possessive, but deeply attentive to her well-being in a way few people in her life had ever been. "Life rarely is," she replied. "Talk later. Dinner at my place. I'll be there. 8:30 after Tilly's in bed," Mrs. P already confirmed. The boardroom felt unusually tense when Eliza entered precisely at 6. The executive team sat in their usual places, expressions carefully neutral. Graham stood at the head of the table. Her place, his posture radiating barely contained displeasure. "Eliza," he acknowledged tersely, "please sit. We've been discussing the situation." She took the seat at the opposite end of the table, deliberately choosing not to challenge his position. This wasn't a battle worth fighting, not when larger ones loomed. "The situation," she repeated calmly. "You mean the video of 2 people playing piano in a public lobby?" Graham's jaw tightened. "I mean the CEO of Southern Echo Records engaging in a romantic relationship with a maintenance worker, publicly in company premises. A relationship that was not disclosed to the board despite clear policies about fraternization." "Facilities manager," Eliza corrected, keeping her voice even, "and the policy applies to direct reporting relationships, which this is not. Daniel reports to operations, not to me." "A technicality," Graham dismissed. "The perception is what matters, and the perception is that you've been indiscreet at best, unprofessional at worst." Eliza looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each executive in turn. These were people she'd worked with for years, some since her father's time. They shifted uncomfortably under her direct gaze. "Is that the consensus?" she asked quietly. "That I've been unprofessional?" The CFO, Vivian Chen, spoke first. "The concern isn't the relationship itself, Eliza. It's the appearance of favoritism, potential conflicts of interest and impact on company morale. Have I shown favoritism toward the facilities department, authorized unusual expenditures, neglected my duties in any way?" Eliza challenged. "Not yet," Graham interjected. "But these situations have a way of evolving. The board's primary concern is protecting Southern Echo's reputation and stability. My father built this company's reputation on integrity and respect for creative expression," Eliza said, her voice taking on an edge, "not on controlling the personal lives of its employees." "Your father never dated the janitorial staff," Graham snapped. A tense silence fell over the room. Eliza felt a flash of anger but controlled it, years of boardroom negotiations serving her well. "I think we've identified the real issue," she said. "Finally, not that I'm dating a colleague, but that I'm dating someone you consider beneath my station, someone who doesn't fit your image of an appropriate match for the CEO of Southern Echo Records." Graham's expression confirmed her words before he could deny them. "There are appearances to maintain, especially for someone in your position." "My position?" Eliza repeated thoughtfully. "Yes. Let's talk about my position. As CEO, I've maintained our market share in a declining industry. I've expanded our digital presence, established our indie label subsidiary, and preserved the artist development programs my father valued, all while delivering consistent returns to shareholders." She leaned forward slightly. "And I've done it without sacrificing my integrity or the company's values. So, if the board feels my personal relationship with Daniel Fraser, a talented musician and dedicated father, who happens to work in our building, compromises my ability to lead this company, I invite them to review my performance objectively and make a decision. The challenge hung in the air. Around the table, executives exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, some thoughtful. Graham's face had hardened into a mask of displeasure. "No one is questioning your performance, Eliza," Vivian said carefully, "but this situation requires management. A statement, perhaps, acknowledging the relationship and affirming your continued commitment to professional standards." Or, Graham countered, a clean break. End the relationship, issue a statement clarifying it was a brief, now concluded personal matter, and move forward with appropriate boundaries reinstated. Eliza stared at him, momentarily speechless at the audacity of his suggestion. Then, with deliberate calm, she gathered her papers and stood. "I'll take your recommendations under advisement," she said formally. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have dinner plans." She left without waiting for a response, maintaining her composure until she reached the privacy of her office. There she allowed herself a moment of pure frustration, hands pressed against her desk as she took deep, steadying breaths. The rational, strategic part of her mind, the part that had guided her through business school and up the corporate ladder, recognized the practical wisdom in Vivian's suggestion. A simple statement acknowledging the relationship would satisfy most observers and allow the story to die naturally. Graham's alternative was unthinkable, yet something deeper rebelled against even this reasonable compromise. Why should she have to issue statements about her personal life? Why should her relationship with Daniel be treated as a problem to be managed rather than a private joy to be protected? By the time Daniel arrived at her penthouse, at 8:30, Eliza had changed from her business suit into jeans and a soft sweater, opened a bottle of red wine to breathe, and reached a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. "That bad?" Daniel asked as soon as he saw her face. Eliza handed him a glass of wine. "Worse in some ways, better in others." She led him to the sofa with its view of Melbourne's nighttime skyline. "Graham suggested I end things with you to protect the company's image." Daniel's expression darkened. "And the others? Varying degrees of discomfort, mostly concerned with appearances rather than substance." She sipped her wine. "They want me to issue a statement acknowledging our relationship while reaffirming my professional commitment, which is reasonable, as these things go," Daniel observed, cautiously. "Completely reasonable, practical, strategic." Eliza set her glass down. "And absolutely not what I'm going to do." Daniel studied her face. "What are you going to do?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Eliza took a deep breath. "I'm going to resign as CEO of Southern Echo Records." "Resign?" Daniel set his wineglass down, searching Eliza's face for signs of impulsivity or anger. He found neither, only the clear-eyed determination he'd come to recognize as her truest self. "Eliza, this is your life's work, your father's legacy." Eliza moved to the window, Melbourne's lights shimmering below like earthbound stars. "That's what I've always told myself. That Southern Echo is my purpose, my identity." She turned back to him. "But these past months with you, and Tilly, they've reminded me that music isn't about boardrooms and market share. It's about connection, expression, joy." "But you can have both," Daniel argued gently. "Issue the statement, weather the gossip. In a month, no one will remember or care about a video of us playing piano." Eliza smiled, moving to sit beside him again. "This isn't just about the video or us. It's been coming for years." She took his hand, her thumb tracing patterns across his knuckles. "Graham and I have fundamentally different visions for Southern Echo. He sees profit margins. I see artists developing their voices. He wants to cut the community programs. I want to expand them." "So fight him," Daniel suggested. "You're the CEO. And he's the majority shareholder since my father died. I've been fighting this battle for 5 years, compromise by compromise." Eliza's expression softened. "But you know what? That's not even the real reason. Tell me, when I heard you play that first night, really play, not just demonstrate, I remembered why my father started Southern Echo in the first place. Not to build a business empire, but to create a home for music that matters." Her eyes held his, earnest and alive with possibility. "I want to build something new, something that honors his vision but isn't constrained by corporate structures or shareholder expectations." Daniel studied her face, recognizing the certainty in her expression. This wasn't a rash decision, but the culmination of a long journey, one that had begun before they'd met, but had found its direction in their connection. What would this new venture be? He asked, already sensing her answer. The Echo Project, Eliza said, the name coming to her as she spoke it. An independent foundation supporting music education in underserved communities, artist residencies, scholarships, performance spaces open to everyone. Her eyes brightened with growing enthusiasm. All the things Graham considers sentimental distractions from Southern Echo's real business. That sounds... Daniel searched for the right word. Purposeful. Beautiful. It does, doesn't it? Eliza leaned against him, her head finding its now familiar place on his shoulder. I have savings, investments, my shares in Southern Echo, which Graham will probably be happy to buy. It won't be easy, but you'll be free, Daniel finished for her. We'll be free, she corrected gently, if you want to be part of it. The question hung between them, delicate but strong, like the gossamer threads of a web catching light. Daniel thought of his careful life, the routines built around Tilly's needs, the safe boundaries he'd constructed after Emily's departure, the gradual healing that had begun with 4 measures of melody left on a piano. I can think of nothing I'd want more, he said simply. The weeks that followed unfolded with the controlled chaos of any major life transition. Eliza's resignation letter, delivered to the board the morning after her decision, created exactly the stir she'd anticipated. Shock, attempted persuasion, and finally grudging acceptance. Graham, surprisingly, was the first to move from anger to negotiation. At least, stay through the transition, he'd urged during a tense meeting in her office. Help us find your replacement. 3 months, Eliza had counted, and I want your support for spinning off the Echo Project as an independent foundation, with Southern Echo as a founding sponsor. Her uncle had studied her with narrowed eyes. You've thought this through, completely. Something like respect had flickered across Graham's features. You're more like your father than I've given you credit for, he'd said finally. Stubborn, idealistic, and usually right. I'll take your proposal to the board. Now, nearly 2 months later, Eliza stood in an empty warehouse in Fitzroy, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto polished wooden floors. The space had most recently housed an art gallery that had relocated to South Yarra, but before that, it had been a recording studio in the 1970s and 80s, a history that felt serendipitous for the Echo Project's first home. What do you think? She asked Tilly, who was spinning in circles in the center of the main room, testing the acoustics with her movement. It's enormous, the girl exclaimed, her voice bouncing off the high ceilings. We could fit 10 pianos in here. Maybe not 10, Daniel laughed, joining them after examining the back rooms, but certainly enough for group lessons, and the smaller rooms would be perfect for individual instruction or recording sessions. Eliza watched them exploring, Daniel's measured assessment balanced by Tilly's exuberant imagination, and felt a surge of certainty. This was right. All of it. The real. Estate agent gave them space, sensing the importance of the moment. Eliza had already reviewed the financials, the zoning regulations, the renovation estimates. The decision was made in her mind. This visit was about feeling, not facts. We could put a stage there, Tilly was saying, pointing to the far end of the main space, and chairs for the audience here, and maybe beanbags for the little kids who can't sit still. Beanbags, Daniel repeated with mock seriousness. Essential equipment for any respectable music venue. Absolutely essential, Eliza agreed, matching his tone. Along with proper lighting, sound equipment, and a piano, Tilly interrupted. A real grand piano, not just keyboards like the one in your building. Eliza exchanged a glance with Daniel. The Southern Echo lobby piano, where their story had begun, was coming with her as part of her separation agreement. Graham had been surprisingly generous in the final negotiations, perhaps recognizing that Eliza's new venture would enhance rather than compete with Southern Echo's core business. That's already arranged, she told Tilly. The piano will be the first thing installed once the renovations are complete. Tilly's face lit up. Really? The same one where Dad left you the melody? The very same, Eliza confirmed. Cool, Tilly pronounced, then continued her exploration, running her hand along the walls as if reading the building's history through touch. Daniel moved to stand beside Eliza, his shoulder brushing hers in the comfortable way they'd developed over months of growing closeness. "She's already planning concerts in her head," he observed softly. "Like father, like daughter," Eliza replied, "though I notice she's more excited about performing than you were at first." "She hasn't learned to be afraid yet," Daniel said thoughtfully. "Of failure, of judgment, of loss. I want to keep it that way as long as possible." Eliza leaned against him slightly. "We can't protect her from everything, but we can show her how to find her way back when things get hard." The we wasn't lost on either of them. These past months had transformed them from CEO and facilities manager to partners in the fullest sense, sharing ideas, challenges, quiet evenings, and Tilly's boundless energy. Daniel and Tilly still lived in their Thornbury flat, and Eliza kept her South Bank apartment, but the boundaries between their lives had softened, becoming permeable in ways that felt both natural and necessary. "So," the real estate agent said, returning from her discreet distance, "what do we think?" Eliza looked at Daniel, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "We'll take it," she said. "All the terms as discussed." As they signed preliminary paperwork, Tilly continued her exploration, her voice occasionally echoing with excited discoveries. "Dad, Eliza, come see this cool old light fixture." Or, "There's a little garden in the back." Later, as they celebrated with ice cream at a nearby cafe, Tilly asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "Will you be at the Echo project all the time now, Eliza, instead of your big office?" "That's the plan," Eliza confirmed, "once I finish transitioning my role at Southern Echo. And will Dad be there too, teaching piano and stuff?" Daniel wiped a smudge of chocolate from his daughter's chin. "That's something Eliza and I are still figuring out, Button. I might teach some classes, but I'll still need my regular job too, at least for a while." Tilly considered this, her brow furrowing with the seriousness of an 11-year-old, contemplating adult complexities. "But you'll be there a lot, both of you, together." The question contained layers beyond its simple wording. Eliza met Daniel's eyes over Tilly's head, reading the same awareness there. This wasn't just about work arrangements. "Yes," Eliza said gently, "we'll be there together, and not just at the Echo project." Tilly nodded, satisfied with this answer in a way that suggested she'd already reached her own conclusions about their relationship. "Good," she said simply, returning her attention to her ice cream. "Because I think you make Dad really happy, and he was sad for a really long time before." The uncomplicated truth of the observation hung in the air, rendered more powerful by its delivery between spoonfuls of ice cream. Daniel blinked rapidly, his hand finding Eliza's under the table. "You make us both happy, Tilly," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. "Very, very happy." The Arcadia Hall glowed with the warm light of vintage chandeliers, their crystal facets catching and scattering the golden illumination across the Art Deco ceiling. Once one of Melbourne's premier concert venues, the hall had fallen into disuse in recent decades before being restored to its former glory by a heritage foundation. Tonight, it was filled to capacity, not with the society patrons of its heyday, but with a diverse crowd gathered for the Echo Project's inaugural benefit concert. Backstage, Eliza adjusted the simple black dress she'd chosen over her usual formal attire. After 6 months of planning, fundraising, and renovation, the night had finally arrived. A celebration not just of the Echo Project's official launch, but of the journey that had brought them here. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former assistant at Southern Echo. "Full house. Graham just arrived with the new CEO. Break a leg." The mention of Graham brought a small smile to Eliza's face. Their relationship had evolved in unexpected ways since her resignation. Without the power struggle that had defined their professional interactions, they'd found their way to a wary respect. Graham had even made a substantial personal donation to the Echo project, though he insisted it was purely for the tax deduction. 10 minutes to curtain, called the stage manager, a former Southern Echo sound engineer who had volunteered his services for the event. Eliza nodded acknowledgement and made her way to the green room where Daniel was helping Tilly with last-minute preparations. The girl sat at a small practice piano, running through scales with the focused concentration that had intensified over the past months. At 12 now, with her wild curls tamed into an elegant updo for the occasion, she looked startlingly grown up. "Ready, Eliza?" asked them both. Daniel looked up, his eyes warming at the sight of her. "As we'll ever be," he replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the evening ahead. Tilly stopped playing, turning on the bench with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "I think I'm going to throw up," she announced matter-of-factly. "That's normal," Daniel assured her. "I felt the same way before every performance, even the big ones like at the Sydney Opera House." "Especially those," Daniel confirmed. "But you know what? The moment I started playing, it would disappear. The music would take over." Tilly nodded, processing this wisdom. "And we're playing together, so if I mess up, you can cover for me, right?" "We'll cover for each other," Daniel corrected gently. "That's what performing together means." Eliza watched their exchange with a full heart. The past 6 months had transformed them all. Daniel reclaiming his musical identity not as a soloist, but as a teacher and collaborator. Tilly blossoming under the combined nurturing of both adults in her life. Eliza herself discovering a leadership style that drew on her business acumen but centered human connection rather than corporate metrics. "Places, please," called the stage manager. 5 minutes. As Daniel and Tilly made their final preparations, Eliza slipped out to the wings, peering through the curtain at the assembled audience. The hall was filled with an eclectic mix: children from the Fitzroy Community Arts Center and their families, donors cultivated during Southern Echo's community outreach programs, musicians both established and emerging, and scattered among them, children from hospitals and care facilities across Melbourne, invited as special guests. The lights dimmed, and Eliza stepped onto the stage to welcoming applause. Under the warm glow of the spotlights, she took her place at the microphone. "Good evening, and welcome to the inaugural concert of the Echo Project," she began, her voice clear and confident. "Tonight marks not just the beginning of a new venture, but the continuation of a legacy, a belief that music belongs to everyone, that every voice deserves to be heard, and that the greatest compositions aren't just written on paper, but in the connections we form through shared creative expression." As she outlined the Echo Project's mission, its education programs, community outreach initiatives, and artist residencies, Eliza felt a deep certainty that this was where she was meant to be, not in a corporate boardroom, but here, creating space for the transformative power of music that her father had believed in so deeply. To officially launch our first program, I'd like to invite to the stage 2 very special performers, she concluded. Daniel and Matilda Fraser. The applause swelled as Daniel and Tilly emerged from the wings, taking their places at the grand piano that dominated center stage. As they settled on the bench, father and daughter side by side, a hush fell over the hall. Daniel's hands hovered above the keys for a moment, a gesture Eliza now recognized as his way of centering himself, of connecting with the instrument before the first note. Then, with Tilly joining in perfect synchronization, they began to play. The melody was immediately familiar to Eliza. Those first 4 measures that Daniel had left on the lobby piano nearly a year ago now expanded into a full composition. What had begun as a question now unfolded into a conversation between the higher and lower registers, between Daniel's experienced hands and Tilly's developing technique. The piece moved through variations, sometimes wistful, sometimes playful, building to moments of complexity before returning to the simple, questioning theme. As Eliza watched from the side of the stage, she felt the music not just as sound, but as the physical manifestation of their journey. Daniel's emergence from silence, Tilly's growing confidence, their own relationship, evolving from chance encounter to shared purpose. The audience sat rapt, drawn into the intimate dialogue being expressed through melody and harmony. The final section of the piece introduced a new element, a third voice joining the conversation, higher and lighter than the others. It wove between the established themes, bringing them together in a resolution that felt both surprising and inevitable, like the perfect final sentence of a well-told story. As the last notes faded into the perfect acoustics of Arcadia Hall, there was a moment of complete silence, that sacred pause between performance and response when music still hangs in the air, too precious to disturb. Then the applause began, building from appreciation to genuine enthusiasm. Daniel and Tilly rose from the bench, bowing together before Daniel stepped back, giving his daughter her moment in the spotlight. The pride in his face as he watched her accept the applause was matched only by the joy in hers as she turned to include him again, reaching for his hand. As they exited the stage, Eliza met them in the wings, embracing Tilly first. "That was magnificent," she whispered into the girl's ear. Absolutely. Perfect. Tilly hugged her tightly. Did you recognize the ending? Dad added it last week. He said it was your voice in the music. Eliza looked at Daniel, who shrugged slightly, his expression a mixture of shyness and certainty. It needed a third voice to be complete, he said simply. The rest of the concert unfolded as planned. Performances by students from the Fitzroy program, professional, musicians donating their talents, and a stirring finale featuring a choir of children from across Melbourne's diverse communities. Throughout it all, Daniel and Tilly remained in the audience, watching each performance with genuine appreciation, while Eliza managed the flow of the event from backstage. Later, as the hall emptied and the technical crew began dismantling equipment, the three of them sat together in the now quiet green room, surrounded by congratulatory flower arrangements and the comfortable exhaustion that follows a successful event. "So," Daniel said, breaking the companionable silence, "what happens now?" Eliza could have taken the question practically, discussed tomorrow's follow-up with donors, the next phase of renovations at the Fitzroy warehouse, the upcoming schedule of programs. But she understood what he was really asking. "Now," she said, reaching for his hand, "we continue the composition, together." Tilly, curled in an armchair with her shoes kicked off, watched them with the perceptive gaze that still sometimes caught Eliza by surprise. "You should get married," she announced with the definitive clarity of a 12-year-old. "Then we could all live in one house instead of going back and forth all the time." Daniel choked slightly. "Tilly, that's not—" "Actually," Eliza interrupted, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "I seem to recall making an offer along those lines once. Something about composing a melody?" Daniel's expression shifted from embarrassment to wonder as he recognized her reference to that first night in the lobby. "I believe I fulfilled those terms," he said softly. "More than fulfilled," Eliza agreed, her voice equally soft. "Though I should warn you, I'm not the same CEO who made that impulsive offer. I've changed." "We all have," Daniel acknowledged, his eyes holding hers with the steady certainty that had become the foundation of their relationship. "That's what happens when you let music back into your life. You remember who you really are." Tilly, watching this exchange with increasing impatience, finally interrupted. "So, is that a yes? Because if we're getting a new house, I want a room with a window seat, and maybe a dog." Daniel laughed, the sound free and unguarded in a way that still sometimes surprised Eliza. "One thing at a time, Button. First, I think I need to properly ask the question that Eliza started a year ago." As he turned to her, his expression grew serious. "Eliza Morgan, if I promise to keep composing melodies with you for the rest of our lives, would you consider marrying me?" The question hung in the air between them, not impulsive this time, but deliberate, grounded in months of growing trust and shared purpose. Eliza thought of all the changes that had brought them to this moment, her leap from corporate security to creative uncertainty, Daniel's journey from silence back to music, Tilly's blossoming under their combined care. None of it had been easy or straightforward, but all of it had been right. "Yes," she said simply, "I would consider it thoroughly complete." As Daniel leaned in to seal their agreement with a kiss, Tilly's triumphant "finally" echoed. In the background, a perfect counterpoint to the moment, just as her voice had become the perfect complement to their melody, transforming what had begun as a duet into something richer, more complex, and infinitely more beautiful. Outside Arcadia Hall, Melbourne continued its evening rhythm, trams gliding along tracks, pedestrians hurrying through autumn air, the distant hum of a city in constant motion. But within the quiet green room, three people who had once been strangers sat together in the comfortable certainty that they had found not just each other, but themselves, their truest voices, their most authentic expressions, their melody of belonging. Some stories begin with an impulsive challenge, others with a fragment of music left on an abandoned piano, but the most powerful ones emerge from the courage to listen, to the unspoken questions, to the silences between notes, to the echo of possibility that remains long after the music seems to have ended, because sometimes, in the resonance of a forgotten melody, we discover not just what we've lost but what we're still capable of creating together.